everyone, and welcome to our Women's Suffrage Storytime. Suffrage is another word for the right to vote. Did you know that when the United States first started, very few people were allowed to vote? It's true. Most people weren't allowed to vote. A long, slow struggle happened for the right to vote for all kinds of people, including people who were poor, women, African Americans, and all kinds of people from different races and backgrounds. Now, did you know this year is a very special year for voting rights? It is. It is the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage, women's right to vote in the United States. Another word for the right to vote is suffrage. And the women who fought for women's right to vote were called suffragists. And those suffragists often fought for all kinds of rights for women. Now, I'm going to read from two books about two famous suffragists, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Sojourner Truth. This book is called Elizabeth Leads the Way, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and the Right to Vote. It's by Tanya Lee Stone and illustrated by Rebecca Gibbon. This is a painting of Elizabeth Cady Stanton. What would you do if someone told you you can't be what you want to be because you're a girl? What would you do if someone told you your vote doesn't count, your voice doesn't matter, just because you are a girl? Would you ask why? I would. Would you talk back? Probably. Would you fight for your rights? Elizabeth did. All of those things used to be true when Elizabeth Cady was a girl. And all of those things might be true today if Elizabeth hadn't led the way. She was only 4 years old the first time she heard someone, a woman, say life was better for boys. The woman had come to visit Elizabeth's new baby sister. What a pity it is that she's a girl. How could anyone look at a little baby and feel sad? What could be wrong about being a girl? I don't know. Let's see what it was like to be a girl then. She was 13 years old when her father, Judge Cady, told her about a woman whose husband had died, that the farm she had spent her whole life working on would be taken from her. Without a husband, the law stated, nothing belonged to her. Elizabeth was horrified by this unfairness. She said that the law should be cut out of every book. Judge Cady told her that wouldn't change anything. The law was the law, and only men were allowed to change the laws. Preposterous, said Elizabeth. That means that's silly. She decided right then and there that she could do anything a boy could do. She jumped over high hurdles on horseback. She rafted across a raging river. She won a prize for being the best in Greek studies. Her father was proud, but he worried about his strong-spirited, rule-breaking daughter. Ah, you should have been a boy. He knew how much easier her life would be. But Elizabeth wasn't interested in easy. At 16, since colleges would not let girls in, Elizabeth begged her father to send her to a girls' school to continue her learning. So while most young ladies were getting married, washing dishes, doing laundry, and having babies, Elizabeth was studying religion, math, science, French, and writing. Several years later, Elizabeth Cady met Henry Stanton. He was an abolitionist, speaking out against slavery. He understood how unfair it was for people not to have rights or power. He did not laugh when Elizabeth talked about freedom. He did not laugh when Elizabeth said all people should be able to live life the way they chose. And he did not laugh when she told him she would add his name to her own, but would not give up hers just to marry him. So Elizabeth Cady became Elizabeth Cady Stanton and had babies, cooked meals, washed dishes, mended clothes, and did laundry. She loved her babies, but she did not love cooking and dishes and mending and laundry. Not my favorites either. One day, her friend Lucretia Mott invited her to a lunch. Lucretia had always shared Elizabeth's ideas about all the things women could do and would do if only they had the right. The other women at the lunch shared them too. Elizabeth got fired up. She proposed they hold a meeting. A meeting that would gather together lots and lots of women from all around to talk. But what would they talk about? There were so many things that needed to be set straight. Married women couldn't own property or even the money they worked to own. Elizabeth had learned long ago that only men could change the laws because only men could vote. That was it. That was the one thing that could change everything. If women could vote, they could help change all kinds of laws. This idea was so shocking, so huge, so daring. Elizabeth's friends gasped out loud. If they were flabbergasted, what would other people think? Elizabeth did not waver. She knew voting was the only way to make a difference. Her battle cry for the right to vote rang out, "Have it we must, use it we will." Even her Henry thought she had gone too far. But on July 19th, 1848, when Elizabeth arrived at the meeting place, she saw for herself that she hadn't. The small church in Seneca Falls, New York, was filled with hundreds of people. Elizabeth read aloud what she and a few of the women had written together. Their declarations of right and sentiments challenged the idea from the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal. When she was finished, she looked into the faces of the crowd and waited. What do you think they thought? Let's find out. The room was silent. Then a rumbling began. It grew louder and louder and louder as people argued whether or not women should be allowed to vote. Word of the meeting spread like wildfire. Newspapers across the country scolded Elizabeth for her boldness, but other women joined her in battle. The idea of women having the right to vote began to buzz in the ears of people from Maine to California. Elizabeth had tossed a stone in the water, and the ripples grew wider and wider and wider. Many said Elizabeth must be stopped, but she was unstoppable. She changed America forever. The end. The next book I'm going to read is about Sojourner Truth. And Miss Truth lived a very different life from Elizabeth Cady Stanton. She was born a slave in New York in the 1790s and escaped slavery in her 20s. She fought hard for her own and her children's freedom. She became a single mother who had to work for herself and her family, and things were kind of hard. Later, she became a well-known preacher and an activist for the rest of her life. She fought for the rights of women alongside suffragists like Elizabeth Cady Stanton. She fought for the freedom and rights of Black people with abolitionists and civil rights activists like Frederick Douglass. And I'm going to read parts of Journey to Freedom, Sojourner Truth by Laura Spinelli. And these parts of the book talk about what Miss Truth fought for and her most famous speech, which is sometimes called the Ain't I a Woman speech. Did you see that picture of Sojourner Truth? She was a very impressive woman. Sojourner Truth always captured the attention of her audience. She stood 6 feet tall and wore a white turban on her head. She carried herself with great pride. She had large muscles from years of hard work. She was so tall and strong that some people even thought she was a man. At the time, many people did not believe a woman could be so intelligent and powerful. But it was not just Sojourner's appearance that struck people. Her thoughts and ideas impressed many who listened. Like most former slaves, Sojourner had never been taught to read or write. She was illiterate. Even without schooling, she was an intelligent woman. Listeners found truth in her argument against slavery. Her honesty impressed them. In 1850, Sojourner met some suffragists for the first time. In those days, women in the United States did not have the same rights as men. We heard about that in the other book. They were considered second-class citizens, much as African Americans were. American women were not allowed to vote, and the suffragists hoped to change this. Sojourner soon joined the women's rights movement. She believed every American deserved the same privileges. Things were not always easy for her, though. Some abolitionists refused to let her join them because she was a woman. Abolitionists were people who wanted to get rid of slavery. Some suffragists refused her because she was black. Sojourner kept fighting, though, whatever people thought of her. She gave one of her most famous speeches in 1852. She was attending the Second National Women's Suffrage Convention. Some people did not want her to speak to the audience. Perhaps they thought her opinions were too strong. Perhaps they did not like the color of her skin. Not everyone wanted to see her walk onto the stage. No one knows the exact words Sojourner spoke at the convention. She could not write down her speech on paper. Remember, she'd never learned how to read or write. But even so, one thing is for sure. People at the convention were moved by Sojourner's pleas. Some even ran home to write down her words from memory. So she kept speaking and doing things, and then around the time of the Civil War, she was working a lot for African American people and their rights. And I'm going to read a little bit about what she did after the Civil War, or right before the end of the Civil War, excuse me. In December 1865, Congress passed the 13th Amendment. This act formally freed all slaves in the United States. Unfortunately, it did not mean that whites treated them well. Many people continued to believe that blacks were inferior. Sojourner Truth still had work to do, both for African Americans and for women. The government appointed Sojourner to the Federal Freedmen's Bureau. This organization helped former slaves start their lives as free men and women. Sojourner helped black women learn skills to help them find new jobs. In 1868, the 14th Amendment granted black men the right to vote. Sojourner knew this was a big step, but women of any color still could not vote. She continued to work with the suffragists, and in 1872, she even tried to cast a vote in the presidential election. Workers blocked her entrance to the voting booth. Sojourner also continued to preach. Some people admired her, others hated her. Her honesty and her unusual appearance struck almost everyone she met. Over time, Sojourner became ill. She died in Battle Creek, which is in Michigan, in 1883. She was about 86 years old. She had not been afraid of death any more than she had feared life. She believed that God would still accompany her on her final journey. More than 1,000 people attended the funeral of Sojourner Truth, which is a lot in those days. Remember, they didn't have cars. Well-known abolitionists and suffragists spoke to the crowd, and they told everyone about the remarkable woman named Sojourner Truth. And if you want to learn more about Sojourner Truth, you can visit the Sojourner Truth Project at sojournertruthproject.com, and you can listen to her famous speech and read it too, 2 different versions.
As we heard, the 19th Amendment gave the right to vote to all women in the United States. One of the very important symbols to the movement was the star. When an amendment is made to the Constitution, 3/4 of the states have to vote. Since there were 48 states in 1920, that meant that 35 had to vote. And Tennessee was the last to vote, which made the 19th Amendment law. Women everywhere coordinated the efforts to get the amendment passed through the National Women's Party, and they made a large banner of gold, purple, and white and attached stars for every state. You can cut out a star of your own and decorate it the way you think it would have looked.
And now we'll have a song about women's suffrage.
Hey, we're gonna learn a song about suffrage. Are you excited?
I'm always excited.
Are you excited? Yeah. So maybe your mom and dad, and maybe even you, have heard of Schoolhouse Rock. Do you remember Schoolhouse Rock?
I do.
I watched Schoolhouse Rock. You did too?
Yeah, hot stuff.
Amazing. So we're gonna sing their song, Suffering Until Suffrage. All right. You ready? Mm-hmm. All right, let's go. Now you have heard of women's rights and how we try to reach new heights if we're all created equal. That's us too.
Yeah.
But you will probably not recall that it's not been too long at all since we even had the right to cast a vote. Well, sure, some men bowed down and called us missus. Let's wash out and wash the dishes. But time rolled around to elect a president. What did they say, sister?
What did they say?
They said, see you later, alligator. And don't forget my mashed potatoes, cause I'm going downtown to cast my vote for president. Oh, we were suffering until suffrage. Not a woman here could vote no matter what age. Then the 19th Amendment struck down that restrictive rule.
Oh, yeah.
And now we pull down on the lever and cast our ballot. And we endeavor to improve our country, state, county, town, and school.
Tell them about it.
Those pilgrim women who braved the boat could cook the turkey, but they could not vote. Even Betsy Ross, who sold the flag, was left behind that first election day.
What a shame, sisters.
Then Susan B., Anthony,
Yeah.
and Julia Howe, Lucretia Mott.
And others.
They showed us how they carried signs and marched in lines until at long last the vote was passed. Oh, we were suffering until suffrage. Not a woman here could vote no matter what age. Then the 19th Amendment struck down that restrictive rule.
Oh, yeah.
And now we pull down on the lever that cast our ballots as we endeavor to improve our country, state, county, town, and school.
Right on.
Yes, the 19th Amendment struck down that restrictive rule.
Right on.
Yes, the 19th Amendment struck down that restrictive rule.
Yeah.
Right on. We got it now. Since 1920, sisters unite, vote on